That's the recommendation. I call first name sometimes. So they like to say, bid in for the appointed and the petition certified. And I say that only because Chris is not here and I don't know if he'll be here. I want to assume. Hey, so are you doing okay? Did you see the email I just sent you? You don't have to look it up. Nancy Lonnie has said that she will be there Thursday, but she's not doing so hot. She fell down her stairs. And I was like, it must be something in the water this week.
It's gotta be all day.
I don't know if it's that. Or maybe y'all are just in too big a hurry to go.
But it's terrible. We're going to have three of them. You can actually look.
No, it wasn't like it.
Except the problem was, one of them was from the
Well, actually, the EO2B master
toilet in the. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So that I think is we're just like, wait, what? It was like the door of the master bedroom. Weird, but okay. You know.
Hello? Lights on.
Toilet. As far away from here is the monitor. I mean, it was just like, that is the worst thing I've ever seen.
Good evening. We're going to call our meeting to order. I would ask, please, if you have your cell phones, to please turn them off this time. We will stand and have pledge of allegiance by Council Member Latham and prayer by Council Member Report.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you would like to pray, would you please remain standing? Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for your amazing grace, your mercy, and your favor. We thank you because you've allowed us to get together one more time on behalf of the city of Madison. We ask that you give us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to make decisions based on behalf of the citizens. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. I hope you've had a chance to read the minutes that was sent to you earlier. If you have, if there are no questions concerning the minutes, we get a motion to approve our minutes of our work session of April 30th, 2021, and our regular meeting of May 10th, 2021.
I so move.
Second.
Are there any more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none. Vote unanimously. Thank you so much. Approve order of agenda items.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, can we, in deference to Joe Smith here, could we possibly move 11B, City Hall Restoration, up closer to the front of the meeting?
Yes, I talked with him briefly, Councilman George, and we're going to move him up to just make it AA, AB. He do have another meeting that he has to attend, so he just wanted to make a brief presentation to us tonight. We can get a motion to move him up.
Mr. Mayor, we need a short executive session to talk about personnel matters, specifically salaries.
Need to go to executive session. That could be AB, I guess. Place of Mr. Smith, we get a motion to go into executive session.
So move. We're not.
Are we voting on one or both?
Move him up to the top of the agenda, get a motion to change that agenda to move up to the top.
You have to bear with me, Mayor. My brain's rattled.
Okay. We can get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
And more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none. Smith will be first. Right. Motion to go into executive session, follow our regular meeting tonight to discuss salaries.
Yeah, I move to go into executive session for personnel matters at the conclusion of this meeting.
Thank you. Are there any more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none. Vote unanimously.
Could we just clarify that should have been a motion to add executive session for
Right.
personnel matters to the agenda?
Right.
Could we?
Consent agenda, IGA Tax Commission and Service Attachment 1, Resolution Surplus Property Attachment 2, Contract EPDC Grant Extension Attachment 3, and Contract Madison Municipal Airport Runway Remodel Wall Absorb Services. All these we talked about in our work session, and they are on our consent agenda for tonight. They're just ready for approval.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the consent agenda with the county Valorum tax IGA, the Madison surplus property document, the EPDC grant for, I believe it was GIS mapping, and the the remarking of the airport by Wall Asphalt Services.
Second.
Are there more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none. Vote unanimous. Thank you so much. So the first item on our agenda tonight would be that of Mr. Joe Smith, City Hall Restoration. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for giving me the opportunity to just talk a little bit about the City Hall rehabilitation project that will be upcoming.
Could you pull the mic a little closer if you would, Joe?
Yes, I
Thanks.
can. Better?
No.
Oh, better for others.
Is it on?
Yes.
The light's lit.
It's
so-
on.
Okay.
That's all.
Thanks. Can you go to the first slide? You may be aware that there is an upcoming rehabilitation restoration of Madison City Hall.
I'll get you there.
Okay. So what I wanted to do was just do a brief executive summary, try to keep it to 15 minutes or so. If there are questions that any council members have coming out of the meeting, I'm happy to meet singly or in person with you to discuss those questions, just to keep the presentation brief tonight. So whatever you need as far as information, I'm happy to provide. So I wanted to talk about the, I can do this, can I? Is it this? Oh, what's that? Which way?
The pointer doesn't work on the TV.
Can you mind advancing slides for me? A brief history of the building, the field survey findings, a little bit about the proposed rehabilitation design, also an overview of the budget estimate that we've received so far, and also what we plan for the RFQ, RFP process. So that's solicitation of bids for the work. The City Hall building is the most recent of the City Hall buildings. It was built in designed 1938, built in 1939. And it's largely intact, surprisingly so. There have been some modifications over the years, but in fact, there's a significant amount of original fabric in the building, and that's quite exciting. So it was built by the Public Works Administration in 1939, and it's interesting just simply in that the Public Works Administration did a lot of dams and big infrastructure, not a lot of city halls, but this was a case where one of the few smaller buildings done by the PWA. Over the years, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next slide. Over the years, a number of interior changes have been made to the building, but it remains largely unchanged on the exterior. The fire department and the police department were originally housed in the building, but are no longer. When the planning department moved out into the Smith Cottage next door and the city administration moved out, it's now vacant. And that's given us an opportunity to do some preliminary interior investigation of the condition of the building. And so you can see that without a lot of those later finishes, that there's actually a significant amount of original plaster intact, and you can, in fact, see the kind of outline of what was originally in the interiors. The biggest space left in the building, or what was originally in the building, was a recorder's courtroom, which occupied the middle of the building. So if you look out there and you see the steep roofed part of the building, it was in fact one large courtroom with a corridor down one side. That was later cut up into smaller spaces, and we've opened that up preliminarily just to see what the state of the original room was. And in fact, all of that Art Deco plaster work is intact, which is an exciting find. And you can see the photo on the left there shows where the gray mark on the wall is actually where the judge's bench used to be. It was sort of the backstop behind the judge's bench. And in fact, there was a raised kind of dais on that side of the room. Unfortunately, the drawings show that there was supposed to be terrazzo on that floor, which you may be familiar with as a finish, kind of a sparkly ground stone look. Unfortunately, that's not there. They VE'd that out of the project, so we got painted floors, painted concrete floors instead of terrazzo, and so we'll not go back with, we're not proposing putting terrazzo back in, but something that would be a suitable substitute that would wear well and so on. So the couple of the big points, let's go to the next slide, Ken, if you would. Most of the changes that were made over the years were made with an eye towards expediency rather than quality or a well thought out design. But that also makes it relatively simple to take some of that stuff out. So you see a lot of dropped ceilings and a lot of ductwork, and that was really the cause of the damage that's in the building, was the installation of those systems. They busted through a lot of stuff in order to run ductwork. But it's all above, it's all in the space between these drop ceilings and the original ceilings, which are still there. So taking all that out will be an exciting kind of reveal, because what you've experienced in City Hall as a space is actually a far finer and a far more exciting experience, and that's what we really want to get a hold of and reveal to the public when this is all done. Next slide, Ken. So the old recorder's courtroom, which you can see in this 1938 plan, is the big goal. It's kind of the prize that will come out of this rehabilitation, is the restoration of the recorder's court. You can see on the left there a little bit of that Art Deco plasterwork, which is kind of lovely and largely intact as well. The look of the proposed space is in the next slide, Ken, which will reopen it to become an administrative office space, but one large space that will be shared by multiple administrative staff members. Next slide, please. The other big focus of the rehabilitation is to increase accessibility to the building. And as you know, the original handicap ramp to the building came in on the backside, kind of tucked into the corner, and that concrete ramp that was put in actually covers over the original stair to the basement, which leaves the basement really inaccessible, and it's kind of a dungeon down there, almost literally. It fills with water, not very pleasant space, but it was the boiler room for the building. And part of what we wanted to do with the new accessibility, the new access points, was to be able to access that basement a little more easily and open it up again. And so, Ken, if you can go to the next slide. The big move is to actually move the entrance on that side of the building to the middle window rather than where it is on the left, and switch the window that's in that opening now to where the door is now. So the entrance will bridge over the stair that drops down into the basement, but there's still room for handicapped accessibility. And then that ramp will be connected back to the sidewalk on the front of the building by a sidewalk, which is, it's a bumpy asphalt alley now, which is in sore need of repair. And so increasing both the visibility and the ease of access for somebody coming into the upper part of the building was a big focus on the work. On the, where the old fire department and police department areas in the lower section where the Main Street and planning used to be, that door, the Main Street and planning door, will be the accessible entrance to that section of the building. There's 2 levels. But the ramp or the access from the sidewalk will need to be extended so that the slope doesn't exceed what's allowable under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's part of that scope as well. Ken, if you can go to the next slide, please. One of the interesting things to note about the landscape, I want to talk a little bit about the site work, is that those little bushes that you see in this 1938-ish photograph on the right pretty much seem to be the bushes, the shrubs, and the hollies that are there now. You can see that they've gotten slightly bigger over the intervening time, and they've gotten so large that the holly bushes are effectively trees now. And they overhang with all of the low-sloped areas of the roof, and they dump all of that leaf litter onto that roof, and that causes problems. And it has caused problems for many years now, and it's time for those hollies to go and become something else, maybe a piece of furniture in the new space, but they're really damaging the building at this point, and so we want to take them all down. And redo the landscape with something that's period appropriate, but it's certainly not damaging the building with roots and not dumping stuff onto the roof. The other big move is along High Street. All of those of us who have one leg that is longer than the other, who had no problem going from the front of the building to the side of the building, well, you're all out of luck because we're going to have a sidewalk that runs down that side of the building so that you don't have to go the overland route to get from the front to the side. And that will also increase accessibility and the ease of access to those entrances of the building as well. So Ken, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So the High Street landscape will be enhanced. The alleyway landscape and hardscape will be enhanced as well. But you won't really see very much change to the front of the building at all because that's the historic entrance. Those steps will remain those steps. That'll be where you come to pay your bills. There's some reorganization internally that I can talk about in much more detail down the road, but or in a different forum. But just know that there is a lot going on in the rehab. So let's talk about costs a little bit. Ken, if you can go to the next slide. We retained a construction manager during the design process to help us work out the approximate costs for the work. This last estimate that you see on the screen was done in March. As you know or may know, construction costs are increasing to a degree that we haven't seen in quite a while, something like 40% over the last 6 months to 8 months. And so this number in March may or may not have any relationship to reality at this point, but we'll find out soon enough because this project will be bid and we'll get hard bids from contractors for the work. So this is an estimate prepared by a contractor who does this kind of work, specializes in this kind of work. We think it's a pretty good estimate, but you can see that there's a 10% estimated contingency, which is roughly $128,000, which may or may not be used. My gut, to just be absolutely honest and straight with you all, my gut is that the cost of construction has increased, that 10% is probably in that budget or needs to be in that budget just to make up that increase in material costs. So we're looking at something around $1.4 million for the work. It could be 1.5, it could be 1.3, we'll see. But that's where we think it is now, given our best estimate. Okay, moving on, Ken. And I just wanted to finish up talking a little bit about the process that we've kind of come up with. Because the building is historic and there's some sensitive work that needs to be done, it's important that the contractors who are retained to do the work qualify. We don't want anybody who just comes off the street with low bid. This is me talking. That we want to make sure that the people who are providing the bids are qualified and it shouldn't be a free-for-all. So the process that we've come up with is that we should start with a qualifications process, a request for qualifications, which effectively is a cattle call for anyone who wants to qualifications. And that those qualifications that can then be assessed by a committee, a selections committee, which will involve some members of the council and architect, city administration as well. And that by late June, we would have those qualifications in hand and we would be able to assess them and make a decision about, say, 3 to 5 of those contractors that we would like to proceed with to provide proposals, hard numbered proposals for the work to be done. And that's what step 2 is a request for proposal, which is following up with with a limited number of those contractors to get bids that can then be compared and selected from among those candidates. So by the end of that process would start in late July. By the middle of August, we should have a selected contractor, and then hopefully by early September, the project can get underway. I expect it to be about a 9-month process. It could be more, it could be less. The contractors will ultimately determine their own schedules. So we'll know what that is as we whittle this down and we get more granular information from actual contractors. So what the hope is that by May, early May of next year, the building will be open and ready to be reused in its new and glorious state. So that is the overview of where things are on the City Hall project. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have now, or I know you have a long agenda, so we can do it another time if required.
Does the roof stay intact?
The slate roof does stay intact.
Because that's a very cool roof.
It is. It's a Buckingham slate, Virginia slate roof. It's David and I had a disagreement about whether it should come off or stay on, and David wins.
UGA won that game.
That's right. We were able to access the attic finally, which was a mystery. We couldn't figure out how to get to the attic. But I went in there, David went in there, we all looked at it. It's in remarkably good shape. All of the layers are in good shape except for a few little leaky spots around the chimney and at the front, which can be repaired from above. So it doesn't have to come off. That saved about $100,000 not doing that. But all of the low slope roofs, which are hidden behind the parapets, all of those will be replaced with new membrane roofs. So we'll cover the parts that need to be repaired, and we're keeping what is in good shape.
Well, I didn't realize about the basement. Is that going to be functional office space for City Hall?
It's not, because it doesn't meet any egress requirements. It's got one door in, it's got one window, it's pretty dark and subterranean. It could be used for storage, it could be used for equipment, but it's not really suitable for usable space.
We'll probably put a dehumidifier down there and pump the water out, but it shouldn't leak. I mean, we shouldn't have any rainwater leaking in.
Yeah.
But now you have to go through a manhole and down a ladder
Yeah.
to get to it. And in the past, we had some phone, not switches, but some connections, and they were always corroding because it's always damp. We got a water heater down there. So anyway, it just being able to access the space and keep it dried out, we'll find a use for it, for whatever.
The entire building is actually on an elevated concrete slab, so there's kind of a seal between what goes on down there and what goes on up above. But like David said, the access is really limited by having to pull a manhole cover and climb down a ladder. The stair goes all the way up, and it's there. It's just been covered by the ramp. So by taking the ramp away and adding a pump and a sump down there, we'll be able to keep it dry, and dehumidifying it will allow us to. It's pretty muddy. You might have seen that photo where it looks like it's flooded a couple times in bad rains. So we're aiming to avoid that ever happening again.
Thankfully, the boiler was taken out years ago. All that was removed. That could be a bit of a mitigation problem now.
And I can't say with any certainty that there's not asbestos in the building, but it appears that any removal of, boiler is typically where you would find asbestos almost certainly, and because that was removed long ago, I haven't seen any obviously asbestos-containing materials, at least in the basement. There may be others in other rooms of the building.
Well, if I can say that the timetable has been a concern of mine. I know it's shared by Manager Nunn, and I'm sure by my fellow council members. So I'm pleased to see the timetable. Although I have a feeling that might stretch, kind of like the contingency 10% might stretch as well.
Yeah.
So. But anyway, I'm glad to see where we got some dates in mind.
Things are happening.
It's going to be beautiful.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say that, this is not patting my own back or anything, but there are many cities in the state that would do this. That this is a wonderful landmark building that served us well for almost 90 years, 80 plus years. And the fact that the city's willing to go back and put it back the way it should be, it's really, really going to be something very good, very nice for a long time. And it's something that Madison would do, and it should do.
And I believe, David, the cost was on the SPLOST the SPOS list?
We've added, we've added on a few SPLOST, more generically as buildings on the latest SPLOST, but we are expending SPLOST funds from one or two back now to expend those and go forward. I'll just remind council, for those who were on council at the time, we used this two-step process at least one other time when we built the Public Works building a few years ago. We went through a process whereby we cast wide net, asked a lot of contractors to submit qualifications. We narrowed it down to 3 or 4 and then invited them to bid on it. So it's not, we're not unfamiliar with that process.
Fortunately, there's a lot of good contractors I've spoken to who are interested in the project from both locally and farther afield as well. So I think we'll get a good turnout of good, well-qualified contractors for it. And there's, because of the interestingness of the project, I think we'll get a, you know, I don't think this is a project that people are going to throw random numbers at. I think they're going to keep their pencils sharp because they're going to want the project. It's a good marquee project, and Madison has a reputation as doing projects right. So I think that helps us in the end.
So it could be a feather in their cap.
Exactly.
To get this project.
Exactly.
Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Public hearing, text amendment, event facility as permitted use, attachment 5. That's everything with that.
Yeah.
Bryce? Yes.
Good evening. This is a text amendment. We've received this request from Mr. Abney on behalf of Mr. Eichhoff. A couple of things I'd like to point out. The Planning Commission had a public hearing on this. They recommended this language to you folks unanimously for approval. In brief, the request is for event facilities as a permitted use in the C1 district, which is the downtown commercial district, our general commercial district, which is C3. A lot of that's near Walmart, Ingalls, that area, for example. And as a conditional use in the P2 zoning district, limited commercial professional, which surrounds our downtown area. In addition to including a basic definition for event facilities and the location, they did make an observation regarding parking. The text of the applicant's requesting for parking is note 24, which basically allows, if they're an event facility that is doing events outside of your standard business hours, or they're focused on that, which is something we can always just check by the sort of activity logs or just simple observations, then they are going to be considered not needing additional parking for downtown. Obviously, in C3, they'd still have to have that, and in P2, as a conditional use, that would be something that would be discussed as a site-specific point when the mayor and council hear any of those, if you ever hear any. We did not receive public comment until today. I believe you folks got that email. Couple of the rationales the Planning Commission used for their decision was in downtown, we have our Arts and Entertainment Overlay District. Event facilities are a natural fit for that. In addition, currently downtown, we do have outdoor events such as in Town Park already, and we have several businesses which have events as part of their accessory uses. James Madison Inn is a good example. Michi's has several side rooms set off for events and things like that. So and of course, every Tuesday and Thursday you have meetings at Chop House. So some examples where we already have an event element that's already concurrent and ongoing. Regarding the C3, they felt, considering the fact that we had mega churches as a permitted use there, well, I mean, we're allowing 600 folks to come. C3 has its own parking requirements, so that addresses that. And then conditional use, again, handles those. I'd like to briefly touch on the comment from the Historic Coalition. Thank you. Just to touch on a few things regarding alcohol sales, that's handled in our alcohol ordinance. So they would have to meet those rules regardless of the zoning use, just like we don't talk about alcohol generally with restaurants and things in the zoning ordinance. If I were just the parking point, and I suppose that's the one thing I want to clarify, and I assume, just for point of clarification, when they refer to C3, I assume they're referring to C1. But if there's someone from that group who can speak to that point, I'll, just for the record, to clarify. But that appears to be what their comments were addressed to. So I think it was most of the discussion centered on those items. It's relatively straightforward on that front. And the applicant is here to answer any additional questions you may have on the subject, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have as well.
Okay, is that a question for Bryce? If not, we'll get into our public hearing. Public hearing is now over. Is there anyone here to speak? First of all, against this text amendment. Anyone on our virtual meeting would like to speak against it tonight? We have a time.
This is live, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I think that, I'm not sure, Ken, is anyone on box? You can't tell on Boxcast, can you?
I can.
Oh, you can?
There are 6 people on Boxcast.
So Mr. Mayor, we should probably wait 1 minute for your call for comment.
Are there any comments against this text amendment? Public comments? No.
Hello,
Yes.
this is Elizabeth Bell. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear us?
Hello?
We can hear you, Mrs. Bell.
Hello?
She can't hear us.
We can hear
This is
you.
Elizabeth Bell. Can you hear me?
I got you, somehow I got muted. Tell her.
Hello?
Can you hear us now? Can you hear us now? Ms. Bell,
Hello?
can you hear us?
Should be able to hear
This is Elizabeth Bell. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you. We are unmuted now. Can you hear us?
You're breaking up very badly. We can only hear portions of words. I would like to just make a few comments about this, and some of it is a question. When was the actual attachment posted to the website?
Wednesday evening, about 6:10 p.m. The agenda was posted on Monday afternoon, about 5 o'clock.
Right, well, this is a zoning hearing, and I think it requires more notice than that to the public. So, first of all, I don't think you should be having a zoning hearing on so short notice. I mean, to say you're having a zoning hearing is one thing, to actually know what it's about is another. And the public wasn't made aware of what the zoning hearing was about until Wednesday evening at 6:10 p.m. If you were checking checking the website religiously, you might have gotten it then, but most of us wouldn't get it until Thursday, and that's simply not enough time for the public to prepare for a hearing like this. This is of significant magnitude for the city and the residents, and so I object to this hearing and any vote on it going forward. I don't think you should be going forward with this hearing. So I object to this hearing and any vote on it on those grounds. And the second thing I'd like to know is, the applicant doesn't have property in P2, so how did this get expanded from a commercial district application to a P2 application? Did the applicant come in asking for P2 use?
All right, you want to answer that?
Yes. Mike is on. Thank you for the reminder. Is so long as the resident owns property in the city, they are eligible to request text amendments. It doesn't have to be specifically in that zoning district, and that's the case on that one.
So the applicant asked for P2 zoning for this?
The applicant asked for, when they were in the process of putting their paperwork together, they asked for earlier language that was regarding text amendments for event facilities. When they looked it over, Mr. Abney wrote about the materials, took that and used that as his template, and as such, he took some of those components from that.
What?
Mr. Abney asked for earlier examples of event facility text amendments the mayor and council and planning commission had looked before in the past, and he used that as his structure or his template, if you will, and used that. So part of those did address those, and he simply incorporated them.
So the P2 section of this was provided by planning and zoning?
No, ma'am. That was
The
provided by
planning
Mr.
department?
Abney. Mr. Abney asked for original language, I think it was from 2018, I think it was. I'd have to check my notes on that for certain. Regardless, he asked for previous amendment language, and he simply used that as his template. I did not, myself, I did not request that he specifically request any particular zone. I just simply gave him information he requested, and he took it from there.
And alcohol sales appear to be unrestricted in this language. They're not tied to anything other than a permit. Restaurants, of course, have to carry commensurate food sales rate, but this doesn't require, there's no tie to food sales, there's no tie to catering. So, you know, people could just schedule a meeting to drink. Right? I mean, it could just be a scheduled party house. And, you know, which is certainly wrong in P2 and in commercial areas, really detrimental to restaurants, I would think.
Can we answer that question on alcohol? Can you hold up just a second? And the clerk is going to answer that question.
Yes, Ms. Bell, that would be regulated under the ordinances that I cover currently. And just like with any other space, such as the cultural center, if somebody rents that space for, say, a wedding, a corporate Christmas party, something that is not requiring anyone to pay to enter, they're not paying for the alcohol, those types of licenses do not, and those types of facility, well, I guess the cultural center does have one, but those don't require an alcohol license through me or the state. However, if there is some sort of event where alcohol is being sold, it would require a permit, a temporary one, or whatever else it would fall under. It would require regulation.
There are not freestanding event facilities with sale of alcohol rights in the city right now, right?
The cultural center falls under a very particular type of alcohol license through the state. It's a private club license. And so they have one, but currently there's no one else.
Right, that's an Elia Montanari institution. That's a whole different ball game.
I see this as very...
This is a commercial enterprise in competition with restaurants and out there, you know, selling alcohol for whatever. I mean, we don't need to play, you know, we don't need to play cat and mouse about this. Let's just be straight up about what it is. This is a commercial enterprise for selling alcohol and not having food requirements and teeing it up whenever they get somebody to reserve the space. It's nothing to, no, I don't understand why we have to beat around the bush about it.
Okay, I'm not gonna play cat and mouse. I'm actually gonna not beat around the bush.
By now, parking, the parking,
Before we leave the
description-
alcohol, Ms. Bell, may I clarify the alcohol? Our land use ordinance does not regulate the use of alcohol for any land use. The alcohol ordinance regulates the use of alcohol. That is administered by the city clerk, that is done through a permit process or through a pouring license. That is how the state law is written. So no land use, whether it's a bed and breakfast, whether it's an event facility, whether it is a kennel, none of those get to determine whether they use alcohol or they don't use alcohol. That is only through the alcohol ordinance. So the concern about the sale and service of alcohol is someone who needs to critique the alcohol ordinance, not the land use ordinance. So special event facilities would only allowed to be poured under the same criteria of the alcohol ordinance that everybody else follows. Now, the reference point that Ms. Bell is referring to is that restaurants do have to refer to and sell 60% food to be able to sell 40% alcohol. That is correct. The only other way to get a pouring license under our ordinance for a straight up down to business is specifically for a caterer's license. In order to get a caterer's license, you have to have a restaurant license. So therefore, they're allowed to pour. All other pouring licenses are issued through a special event process permit that has to go through the city clerk. There is no business in town that can just decide to serve alcohol at any given point. That is a total misnomer, and it is misleading, and I want to be super clear that that is regulated by our alcohol ordinance. It is not regulated by land use, period.
But you're teeing it up to be used in P2, and you're teeing it up to be used in areas where restaurants are trying to do business and in straight up competition with them and taking their parking. while they're at it.
How would it compete with, if you have a special event and you have a wedding reception, we have them downtown now, and you can't sell the alcohol, you have to give it away? What kind of business model is that? You're not competing with anyone. This would just allow places to be event facilities. They could serve alcohol, but they can't sell it. That's the age-old rule of clerks, is when you have a gathering and you have alcohol and there's money present, that's a problem. And that's where the alcohol ordinance comes in. This will not set up a pub, a bar, a speakeasy. It's not going to do that. It will not. It'll operate very similar to the venues that we already have downtown, that are associated with other facilities. Okay, now go ahead and tell me I'm wrong.
The very definition of event facility you have in front of you says they're permitted to sell alcohol.
If they have a caterer associated with them, it's by the alcohol ordinance. They have to have someone with their own license.
That's not the way the definition reads. There are alternatives.
Mr. Mayor, may I suggest that we get back on procedure here? Let the opponent say her piece within the allotted time without back and forth, cross-examining various members of the staff. Then if somebody has a response, or we can discuss this after Ms. Bell gets done. We have not set an allotted time. I don't know what the clock is run on, but if someone is speaking in opposition to it, they should be bound by the time limits.
Well, I would ask that the mayor and council refer to the letter of the Historic Madison Coalition about the fact that the note 24 that accompanies the suggested language for this event facility actually provides no parking restriction. If you take apart the wording of note 24, just straight up logic, read it. There is no parking restriction included there. So if you would look on page 3 at note 2, it's explained very clearly there why this definition is inadequate in protecting both residents of P2, homeowner residents of P2, other businesses in P2, downtown businesses, residential parking, there's no protection for parking here, the way this is written. As to a P2 requirement, I think that it's pretty clear that this is not a place of public assembly as those are recognized under our zoning ordinances. We have schools and churches as public assembly buildings. This is the party facility. It's completely different. And what it's going to bring to P2, which is supposed to be a passive buffer between commercial and residential, is a whole different ballgame. There'll be on-street parking, there'll be parties going on, there'll be alcohol, there'll be noise, and to just say, well, you can fall back on the noise ordinance simply dumps the responsibility for policing these facilities on the neighbors. You're going to have late night crowds walk through. There's potential increase for crime. These areas are supposed to be a buffer from all of that to buffer the residential neighborhoods. And you're just, by allowing these party facilities to come in, you're just completely negating the purpose of P2, which is to buffer residential neighborhoods from this type of late night and frequent usage, big parking. Even in our comp plan, it says these kinds of things, even places of public assembly shouldn't be considered until you have parking in check, and we certainly don't. It's going to be parking on the street in P2 areas. It's going to spill into residential areas. So my position is, from a timing position, we shouldn't be having this hearing. The unregulation of alcohol sales, both in commercial and in P2. Parking is an issue in commercial and P2 for all the reasons stated in the letter from the coalition. And
Ms. Bell, you have about 1 minute left. Ms. Bell, you have about 1 minute left. You have 1 minute left.
I just ask that you deny the application, or at a minimum, table it and work on recrafting it so that you don't endanger both the businesses of the people in the commercial district and the residents in the residential neighborhoods and in P2. You have residents there. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? Okay. Anyone here for? Mr. Abbott, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'm Lee Abney. I'm representing Thomas Eycloth. He's the applicant for this text amendment. We have brought this here tonight to ask that the city consider event facilities in their arts and entertainment districts, primarily in the downtown area, that has built-in parking, primarily for business daytime use from 9 to 5. These type uses will typically be in the evening and on the weekends. And so we're asking that those parking requirements be waived. We're asking for these event facilities to be used for group meetings, banquets, weddings, anniversaries, and other type assemblies, which are clearly what you want to have in your arts and entertainment district. You want to encourage tourism. You want to encourage out-of-town visitors to come visit our town and to see it. As far as the concerns that have been presented, of course, P2, we're requesting that be conditional, which would mean that any owner that wanted to do an event facility would have to come back to the city first. They'd have to come back. Parking could be a condition that was added. Uses could be a condition that's added. Alcohol could be a condition that's added. And that's why you would make it a conditional use, to make sure that those uses are consistent with the P2 area and that buffer area, as has been discussed. So the council's job on a go-forward basis would be to look at each of those on a case-by-case instance, which is why we've asked for those to be conditioned. Of course, the commercial uses we feel like are appropriate for event facilities and for the public to assemble, so we've asked for those to be permitted uses. And I'm here to answer any questions that y'all may have about this text amendment.
Are there any questions for Mr. Abbott?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Is there anyone else want to speak for this text amendment? Can they hear us, Ken? Anyone else wants to speak for? If not, it's back to the council for debate.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask staff a question?
Sure.
There was a question about notice. Can you state for the record that whether statutory notice was given?
Yes, sir. The legal advertisement was run 15 days before the meeting. The agenda was posted, and yes.
Thank you.
And I might add to that, David, that this staff report was on the city website because I pulled it off 3 weeks ago for the planning and zoning hearing. And if you go under agenda for the planning and zoning on the May 20th, maybe I don't know when it came under our mayor and council agenda with attachments, but it was available online because that's where I got it for the planning and zoning meeting, which is the device that I use to get a head start on the zoning issues that we talk about. So I can hear some of the arguments that come up in planning and zoning, so I can do my homework properly and look at the documents and the zoning ordinance. And again, that was 3 weeks ago, so maybe it wasn't, quite the public, some of our citizens would want, but it seemed to me to be sufficient.
Thank you, Councilmember Joyce.
Not what we want, it's a matter of law.
Well, I think staff stated that the law was met, Ms. Bell.
If you don't post up the content for the agenda, it's illusory. It's nothing.
Mr. Mayor, is the public hearing closed?
Yes, sir. The public hearing is closed. So no more comments.
The discussion from now on is among the council and the mayor.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Carter, do you agree with the assessment that it's done legally and all the timing?
As long as section 1140 was complied with the 15 to 45 day notices, I agree that the notices were properly published according to the ordinance.
What's the name? Oh, okay, thanks.
There are two types of notices in here. One was the commission hearing and the other one is the notice for the council hearing.
So at least our staff they did what they were supposed to do.
Whether they were posted or not is a matter for our clerk.
Are there any comments from our council members?
I would like to know a little bit about parking, because it seems like the parking was a big concern. Can you tell me a little bit about the parking, Bryce?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
Just to recap, so we can clear a few of the other items real fast before we get to the more contentious point, or at least from the public comment, that is. 1C3 would still be required to provide parking full out per the ordinance. That's not an issue. P2, again, would be a conditional use, so the mayor and council would look at each time, if it was requested, ever, would look at each site and make a site-specific decision and can place additional requirements on parking or parking-related matters. So, including materials or something else if need be. So, easy stuff out of the way first. The question comes down to the C1 district, which I believe is what one of Ms. Bell's points of contention. And the note 24 does require it if you're going to be during certain periods during the day. One of the ways we can tell, again, if they're going for having events that do have alcohol, we'll have a record with Ashley. But if nothing else, it's just simply we can check their availability or their event calendar. It's a very quick way. We have an eyewitness. It's easy to eyewitness. If our code enforcement officer goes by every day and there's events constantly, then that's very straightforward. The thing is we do allow a degree of uses to occur that don't require parking with the event facilities. As we mentioned, restaurants. Restaurants aren't required necessarily to provide some do because they wish to control their own parking, like Amici's. They want to have some spaces for them. But others rely entirely on public parking. And there's nothing that would prevent any of those restaurants from having, or Amici's, having much more event space in terms of guest dinners, anniversaries, whatnots, that would actually exceed what they provide, that they would be relying on the downtown area to provide. So,
Understood. I like that. Okay. Thank you.
yes, ma'am.
Carrie, this was looked at fairly carefully, and the wording in there is, like it says, after 5 or on Friday and Saturday, when events would be held, the downtown business would be closed. There would be abundance of parking. You may have to walk a long ways to get to the event, or they may have to have a shuttle that picks people up and takes them to the event. But it's not during the prime business time. And I do agree with Mr. Abney that these kind of events are going to be, Madison is becoming a event center where people like to come get married or family reunions or anything like that. So it's going to bring more business to the downtown, and it's not going to take away from the restaurants because these people will have to have a caterer typically, and they will probably go to a lot of the restaurants around town to cater that event. So it will probably increase their business.
One thing that bothers me about the parking is the vagueness of the terminology. I mean, you've got the planning department report here that talks about, quote, most of the use will be outside of hours. You have Attorney Abney's letter that talks about, quote, events will primarily occur at night, primarily and mostly. I read that, and if they have 51 events a year outside the 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and 49 events a year within those daytime hours, they've met their obligations here about being primarily and mostly. You see my point? It's very vague wording, and it gives me no solace, and I don't think it gives our citizens much protection as far as what the parking situation is. I will say I agree that no one else in the downtown is required to have parking, and that's the long-term solution, which we won't solve tonight, is a city parking lot.
And Eric, we talk about parking in our city all the time.
We do.
I mean,
and we nibble around the corners, Mayor, and until we get a structure that's located in the middle of town, I mean, we're going to continue to have these. But I don't think the protestations that is going to be mostly at night, there's nothing that requires that in this wording.
well, and I think we have to also, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Hello? Yes. Are you trying to get mayor and council comments?
Yes, I am. I'm trying to watch on the GoTo meeting function that I can't make out what you guys are saying, but I can see that it says public comments is open at this point.
No, the public hearing is closed.
Public to, hey, Carol. Yes, Carol, we were still talking about mayor and council are currently discussing it, and public comments have been closed. And is back mayor.
Well, the screen says it's open, and I clicked to be unmuted earlier, and that didn't happen. I wasn't unmuted. I own property in P2, and I would like to know what's going on. I can't hear what's going on at that meeting. So I just wanted you to know that the public is not being heard.
That's not how it's
I can't participate. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Okay, but we don't have any requirements, Mr. Mayor, Matt?
Sure.
We don't have requirements for other facilities that are in downtown at the current time. So it shouldn't affect how we vote for the facility that we're talking about right now.
Well, yeah, I don't disagree with that. In C2, personally, I am not going to be voting for anything in P2. flat out, whether it's parking or noise, that's residential. You look at the wording in our own zoning, it's got words like pedestrian character, transitional area to buffer surrounding residential neighborhoods from highly active downtown center. I mean, clearly it doesn't fit in with P2 in my mind, so I'm not voting for this proposal for P2. So I think it needs to be separated between the C1 and C3. For my vote, P2 is out. I'm also concerned, Mr. Mayor, we are just weeks away from allowing the public back in for these meetings. Based on the problems we're having with people, I just got an email from somebody who can't hear properly. I mean, is this something we could put off till next month? Even if it's a called meeting, can we wait a couple of weeks till we have a chance to let people, properly voice their objections? I don't know. It just seems a little bit in the what's the rush category.
What problems are we having?
Well, I just got an email from one of the viewers on GoToMeetings who can't seem to get audio. You just heard, I believe it was Carol Winslow, can't get audio. She's trying to watch it. That CW, I believe, is her up on the GoToMeetings box. At any rate. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm not voting for this proposal for P2. C1's a little different. C3 is probably, I mean, the parking issues are there, and they're for every business in C1, like you say. There's no solutions, but I wouldn't rely on this verbiage I see here to give us protections on parking that would be after hours. Mostly, primarily, that seems unnecessarily vague to me.
And Mr. Mayor, I had the same concerns actually on the parking, exactly the
Mine is
same,
the
because
parking.
it said primarily but if maybe we could tighten that down to where we can get some assurances that they are after those hours, or else they couldn't do it. And in terms of I really hate kicking things down the road. But I also, if there are issues, and I've missed a meeting one time because of my own, I wasn't aware how to do it, and I wish I could have attended. I don't know how Mr. Adney and the applicant feel, but, I think that's got some legitimacy to wait and let these people be heard so that we don't either open it up for them to be heard now and vote tonight, and I don't know the legality of that since we've already closed the public hearing, but. And that would be fine.
Talking to your mic, Mr. Jimmy.
The council has the right to table the motion, the council has the right to deny the motion, or the council has the right to approve the motion. Either way.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
If the primary problem is P2, is what I'm hearing, more than the downtown part of it, can we not amend this or change this to be just for C1, C3, and then come back, and I agree with you, Eric, address the P2 when it becomes up? It's a conditional use in P2, but
That's my thing. It is conditional, which means it's not
we would
set in
have,
stone.
we would have to approve it.
Yes.
So, but if you're concerned about that being in there, I'm asking the applicant if we could drop the P2 and just move forward.
So I'll remind you that the council has full options. When it comes to you for review, you have the right to approve it as presented. You have the right to deny it as presented. You have the right to modify the application and for a text amendment, because it is a text amendment, and you can decide what portion of the text to modify or not. So you can parse that. You could decide only on C1. You could decide on C1 and C3. You could decide not to add P2. Planning staff had pretty strong discussions about parking specifically. The alcohol we didn't discuss because it's a no-brainer. It's not regulated by land use, and so we tossed that to the side. That is a red herring. But the parking was a strong discussion. One of the reasons that it was a strong discussion was because the only two land uses that are required to provide parking in the downtown are lodging and residential. And so we did want the assurance that it would only be in non-business hours. We provide 385 owned street parking spaces, and all our businesses, all the other businesses use those for free during the day. We didn't see any problem with these businesses using those for free during off hours. However, if you feel that language needs to be tightened up even for the C1 district, because those are the people affected by the shared parking arrangement, is the C1. P2 we didn't struggle with a lot because we knew it was conditional. And again, when we were asked to give feedback and what we had drafted, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, the reason that we included P2 is because we have an event facility in P2, and we included all areas where it's a lodging facility that offers outdoor events. So we tried to cover Brady Inn, James Madison, help me. The Dovecote House was being looked at, and we have 2 properties in downtown that are being looked at right now. So we tried to cover all the ones that we were on the books and that we're expecting to be on the books. It will not affect Brady's Inn's the status to be able to hold outdoor events. They arrange for off-street parking. They've never parked on the street. And so if y'all want to strike P2 from the list, I don't see that there's any problem with that.
As long as it's within the scope of the notice.
It's within the scope of the notice, and I think the applicant would be okay with that. There's no objection if you struck that. You will probably see that come back to you probably next month or the month after from an interested buyer in that area. But those are the kind of things that, you know, when we're looking at it, we're looking at it more comprehensively. When an applicant brings it forward, they're just using whatever language that might already be extant and tweaking it. So I think you have full latitude to do that. If you want to tie down the C1 language, we need to hear a suggestion. Because some of these facilities do intend to do meetings during the day where they might have a group meeting of 50 people. If you want that precluded, then that would have to, you know, if you say if they can only use it after nighttime, you're going to preclude those meeting that are smaller. Most people are not getting married during the day. It's usually probably meeting facility functions during the day. That's why we wrote it a little loose on that. Or when we gave the language to Lee, I don't know which pieces of that you altered or didn't because I haven't reread it. But if you want that tight, remember what you are going to be precluding. That'll be probably small event activity that's family reunions, do daytime stuff, it might training sessions and meeting facility stuff. So that may affect those kind of things. The bigger impact stuff like weddings and party barn activity, that would likely be an evening activity or a weekend activity. People don't usually do a lot of that during the daytime. So just remember what that could be.
What you could do in this case, there are 2 sections to this application. One of them is the definition of the events, which is the modification, the definition that you would put in section 210. The other part of it is a modification to section 620.3, table 7, which is asking you to put a P under C1, a P under C3, and a conditional under P2. You can select any of those or all of them, or if you want to knock out, of course, P2, it would be a conditional use. And if you don't want anything in P2, you would just simply deny it as to P2, leave an X, put an X in there.
Absolutely. And we've had 2 requests this week to look at our zones.
You would be acting
We're
not on the
suggesting
definition
those.
section, you would be acting on what's permitted where.
But if the applicant's okay with the strike of P2, which I heard an affirmative, and y'all may decide we're not ready for C3 as well. I think C1 is what's most important to you. That's what I heard.
Thank you, Monica. So, Mr. Abbott, you're okay with striking P2?
We are, Your Honor. Thank you.
Guys have any other thoughts?
So you'd leave an X in P2 for the time being? in that box. That would be the basis of your motion, because really what you're looking at is what amendments you want to make to 620.3 there in the staff report.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask just one quick question, and I'll be done? The part about a meeting in town, to me, is different than an event in town. I mean, they're coming here as a central location just to, and we've had those. We've had a lot of those. We've had some of them here. A meeting, you might just add in there that not to exceed 50 people or something, and do it that way. But most of the people that want a meeting will probably go to a restaurant space so they can eat also, which will increase their business.
So we're back at C1. We get a motion, yeah, Nathan on council. So it's dragging it on and on and on.
Should not the applicant be providing the wording of their application to us? I mean, why are we having to, right now, kind of on the wing, craft language that we think is going to work for parking? I mean, I'm not really prepared to, sit here and rattle off wording for them. I mean, are you, Ed?
The applicant agreed to strike P2. The wording in C1 stays the same.
So
Is that not correct?
Yeah, I guess it would, but I mean, we sort of had a couple of us thinking that the wording was a little bit vague in terms of parking. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying I'm not saying that I'm opposed to it in C1. Parking is a problem for everyone, and I don't want to put any more requirements on them that we don't put on other people. And no one really supplies parking, but I just don't want anyone to get the impression that we have protections with this wording, because to me it is just way too vague. It doesn't protect us with anything. You can have almost half your events in the daytime, Monday through Friday, and still meet the requirements of this proposal. That's what I'm saying. I'm not ready to be sitting here crafting that myself. But
In the past, how many events, Monica, do you know how we had during the day? Bryce or David?
I haven't heard we really don't, I haven't gone through and checked the alcohol licenses, which would be one way of checking. But there's also the aspect, again, we have restaurants that, they have their events when people come in. We know the Chop House has 2 a week.
Yeah.
They're meeting.
Before COVID, I would say that we've done probably one statewide conference meeting during the day every 3 to 4 years. They do somewhere between 100 and 300 people, because James Madison will seat 300. We've had, just like the FHA group came and used our facility, that was 100 people during the day for 8 hours. They come in, they do their thing, they let them loose, they shop in the afternoon. We've probably had, Ashley be the best source of that, we've probably had maybe no more than 6 a year. The large group like that.
Large groups like that, I would estimate, but this is used fairly often for just like a half-day meeting, and then people go to lunch around here. It was used quite often pre-COVID.
For instance, we got a call last week for a state group meeting of 40 people to come, and they're going to use it for 6 hours during the day. Those are the kind of day event activities. We can parse events and meetings out separately, but in reality, they use the same facilities, and the parking problem you're talking about doesn't distinguish between whether it's a meeting or whether it's an event. They're using public assembly facilities, and they're using public parking, and those are the two things you're weighing regardless of the type of facility,
But drilling back down to, I'm not talking about this building or restaurants, because I'm one of those meetings every week, and it's more like an extension of the dining room, and we feed 30 more people, which is good business. Or Kiwanis on Thursdays, that's a part of the restaurant. Or the James Madison has weddings, that's part of a bigger business. We're talking about event facilities that only do events, that do nothing else. Isn't that what we're talking about? The ability to license a location to do nothing but events, to serve, to give away alcohol, or to have a meeting, or to have an event that is in that space, and that space does nothing otherwise. Am I getting that wrong?
That's right. Their primary purpose would be to
It's not in a
rent-
hotel, it's
they
not in a
rent-
restaurant, they rent space.
They rent the hall or the space, just like this room, just like renting the Cultural Center's hall, just like renting the Brady Inn's outdoor space, just like renting the market, James Madison's hoo-ha space down there.
Variety Works?
The Variety Works.
I see that as part of a bigger business, though. I mean, that's...
Don't expect that they're not going to crack those out down the road. Those are basically public assembly spaces. They're not gathering to worship, they're gathering for an event, or a
Madison is
meeting, or training.
still pretty small. We're
Yep.
still, 10 blocks or whatever. So how many spaces right now, today, are open spaces for event facilities that would do nothing else? 3? 2? I'm thinking...
We have probably 4 that have started getting real close to be doing more events, and their other thing is their secondary use. The prime example was Kathy Russell's facility. She was a restaurant that did some events, but we all know that what she was running was an event facility that had a
So
restaurant
this
occasionally.
legalizes and legitimizes that kind of use, where if all they want to do is events, that's what they can do, right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm just trying to get it straight in my
That-
simple
that-
head.
that it makes it the primary use instead of them being upside down.
And right now, we don't have event facilities in downtown as a primary use,
That's
correct?
correct, and that's
Okay.
why, Lee's pushing it forward for a specific user who's got a space that he wants to lease for
And it's
activities.
fairly small.
Yeah.
I'd say, I don't know if
I
you
bet
could
his
get
fire
50
capacity
people in
is
that.
50, isn't it? Yep, his
Fire capacity is
his
what?
fire capacity is 50 because it guides the building. But in reality, we knew that we had a special event facility problem probably about 5 years ago because some of our uses were starting to get upside down. The hall was getting rented more than maybe revenue from other spaces. And as people were flipping their uses upside down and the county was having a special event facility problem, we were like, we need to add a definition to the ordinance and be clear.
All right, that's the,
But
that's
we
the,
dropped
that's
it and
why
didn't
we're,
carry
that's
it
why,
forward.
right.
And so,
Okay.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
Councilmember Joyce, I would point out to your example of the 51 events outside of the parking hours we're talking about where they were required in 49. That's only 49 days out of the year that they would actually have any really parking demand on downtown. So one of the things we need to keep in mind in event facilities is, unlike a restaurant which has a steady lunch rush, you either have an event or you've got maybe the owner and 1 or 2 staff people coming in just to set up for an event on the weekend or something. So that is another factor when it comes to considering parking, because event facilities are by their nature and very sporadic in most cases, potentially.
And, I will admit too that as far as the merchants' interests are concerned, it's very possible they may deal with the competition for parking for their customers in return for having increased foot traffic in town and maybe more people walking in the door buying whatever they buy in town. Clearly if this is going to be approved, in my opinion, C1 is the place to do it. C3 has the benefit of more space and potential parking down there. That's a little different. I don't have a problem with that. C1 is where it belongs. It will increase foot traffic. There's a lot of pluses for it. The parking is a concern, but it's a concern that everybody who has a business downtown has to deal with until we somehow identify decent parking for the downtown guests.
And staff's not going to argue that we feel like there's a parking issue. The the context of the amendment as drafted from the language that I see was the best possible way to balance still doing downtown midday stuff and weekend event stuff. But if you've got more specific language, I'm sure Lee's open to that.
If we're not,
Staff doesn't have
if we're
those
not going,
suggestions, or
if
we
we're
lay it on
not,
the
if
table.
we're not going to track it, if we're not regulating it, strike it. Because I'm not counting events, and I'm not going to say most or many, and y'all not either. So if it gets to be a problem, we'll just have to change again. I mean, because how, you can suggest it all you want to, but if they have 50 lunches or 59 lunches during the year, they're going to rent it for that, and I would. So don't put any language in here, because the horror is, the bad part is that someone who has a parking or sees a parking problem or is next to an event facility says, you say this in your ordinance and you're not doing it. So it's just going to be impossible it sounds good,
And
but it's,
bear in mind, when we talk about the 50-person capacity, this is not a variance request. This is for the whole district. So we really shouldn't be talking about whether there's 50 capacity in this one thing. If this would apply to anywhere in C1 or anywhere in C3 or
yes.
P2 if you go
Yes,
there.
sir, and I'd be very clear, planning staff doesn't have time to go count number of people at an activity either. Whether it's at Town Park or the African American Museum or Heritage Hall.
Right.
We don't have time to go count people. But if you're asking us to evaluate, which is what I believe our staff report does, is to evaluate which zone is appropriate if we want special event facilities. The A&E zone is the appropriate space. Then we looked at where the other zones were that we would expect to receive those requests. P2, we already have one, so we kind of expected it there. And C3 is where you will have other forms of public assembly, like, we don't have one, but
Mega church.
mega churches in our list. But I was thinking more like we don't have
like a
stadium.
private conference center?
Yeah, like more like stadiums, arenas, private conference facilities. We believe the locations are correct. If you want to put additional conditions, or if you want to add additional language, if you've got a suggestion, we didn't. We got Lee's text, we looked at it, we evaluated it, and we didn't see a way to tighten it down without causing the very things that we think are good during the day to preclude them out. And I agree with Elizabeth Bell's assessment on parking. I think it is a problem. I think it's something we have to worry about. And on-street parking in P2 would be a problem. But we haven't experienced that with Brady Inn, so I can't live in a world of fear. I have to live in a world of what do we know, what could happen, and what's realistic in terms of regulation. So,
Could we possibly alleviate some of these concerns if we made it conditional in C2 instead of permitted? Or excuse me,
you mean C1?
C1.
You can. I just remember our previous attorney, excuse me, Mr. Current Attorney, but the previous attorney would always say, okay, what conditions do you want us to weigh? And so if we did that, I think we would want to weigh what parking is. It also means that each person, when we're answering that question, they're doing a twofold process. And y'all have tended to be on the more business-friendly side of things as opposed to 2 public hearings on that. I'm not trying to talk you one way or the other. Whichever way y'all think is, I think we need a parking deck. I'm not worried about the limitation on parking. I think that you have people who can use it during the daytime, you have people who can use it at night, and we've got a lot of downtown uses who have been very proactive with sharing parking. So, cross parking.
Let me bring you back to Town 220. I mean, they have weddings all the time. Parking, people's parking, and it's late evenings, weekends. I don't have any complaints.
But when we do have an event at Madison Variety Works, and an event at the conference facility, and Amici's is slammed, the parking is tight.
It's tight.
And the last 2 buyers we've had that looked in the downtown, The first thing that they've asked about has been parking, and we've had to identify where the public lots are, where the on-street parking is, and where the relationships that they could build are with surrounding churches or banks. But in reality, the banks and one or two restaurants are the only ones who've provided any parking for themselves. Everybody else is dependent on the public parking. So it's a good discussion you're having tonight.
Right, and if our council members remember, I think Councilmember Lathrop has been talking parking ever since he's been a member of our council. So maybe we'll listen to Councilmember Lathrop and see if we can.
This is no input at all on a legal consideration at all, and I try not to ever talk about policy. I would just tell you, when you mentioned the churches, our church makes $20,000 a year off of a ball games selling. It may be a good thing for the churches to consider $5 a piece, parking for special events and that sort of thing, because it really has, helped our budget. Over there, that's in Athens, of course, but when you go downtown to Athens, whether you got an event or not, you go to the National, they got no parking at all. So next thing you do is you pay somebody next door to park in their lot. But that's just a little experience to share.
Well, does anybody have any specific language that they would like us to consider, or a way to not preclude daytime meeting activity, or is daytime meeting activity not important?
I think daytime meetings are good for our city because people probably do shop downtown. It's out early.
And we've tried hard for years to get people.
Exactly.
To town.
That would be what I would say. I don't think we should preclude daytime.
So even though I'm reluctant to name names, does the Madison Inn and the Brady Inn right now able to do what we're now proposing because they're grandfathered?
Right now, they do that as an accessory use, which is growing and has grown. They're primary, like the Brady Inn is primarily a lodging facility that has some special events. It's an accessory outdoor activity.
So the difference, this would be a primary use, and theirs are secondary.
And that was the point David was trying to make, and
The point that David made very clearly and concisely, I'd like to say.
Which went right over my head, evidently.
Because it was so concise.
I mean, but Eric, that's always.
Too concise. You got to dumb it down, David.
We do have a couple that are approaching where their primary use has become almost secondary to the amount that they were using it for event activity. We had a couple where we started to get a little worried.
Let me ask you, the council, do you see a difference between C1 and C3 in terms of this proposal?
Other than the potential, the parking in
The
C1,
parking.
but other than that,
So less of a parking issue in C3?
I would think it'd be less,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, parking problem in C3.
C3, they're required to provide one space for every 4 seats in their facility. No discussion. They have a parking requirement for places of assembly. So whether that's a movie theater, whether that is a church, or whether that's an arena, it's one parking space for every 4 seats.
And it's a requirement?
Yes, all C3 is required to provide their own parking. All C1 is exempt. So again, the only 2 uses in downtown that are treated differently are residential and lodging.
Well, Monica, you've been a big help to us. Thank you.
I don't know that I feel like I've been a big help, but maybe it answered some questions.
Is there anything else you want to pursue? Not, we're down to a motion.
I would
word it.
Don't know how to word it. Ask the attorney, he can help you word it, but
Well, my question is, are we going to want to strike P2
I think we are. Our attorney.
and let us come back to that and address those concerns? Because I'm in favor of that, so I would move that we accept the text change for C1
Text amendment.
and strike P2.
And what about C3?
They have to provide their own parking, so
Yeah, but are you're making a motion now to accept this,
well,
taking out P2 and accepting the application for C1 and C3?
Yes.
Have a motion on the table, there a second?
Let me make sure I got it straight, because we've talked a lot. So your motion is to strike out P2, but accept parking, accept what we have in front of us for C1 and C3.
Yes.
So the motion would be to approve the amendment as to section 210 with the understanding that section 620.3 table 7 would provide an X at P1, an X at P2, P at C1, X at C2, P at C3, X at C4, and X at C5.
Okay, I'm with you all now.
That's my motion.
And I second your motion.
There any more discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question, please. David, you mentioned that if it didn't work, you change it. What would that look like if it became problematic? And I'm not suggesting it will, but if these pop up everywhere because it's not one location we're talking about, it's a change in the
city.
Yeah, and so
Well,
we could just change it.
You may have businesses that are grandfathered, but again, Madison is small. It doesn't, I don't see this as the dam breaking. We've not had a lot of demand for this. We've had some unique spaces and some people who want to try things. And if you go back and look 5 years from now, you say, well, it wasn't a big issue because this space is now retail or it converted to a restaurant. So I think incremental changes or a big change, and you could grandfather uses if they totally don't work. Then there are land use things that you can do to protect people that are already there, close the door, and then move on. I mean, I agree that I've always said there's no such thing as a parking problem in a downtown. You have parking issues. If you've got cars, you mean you've got people there, and you've got buildings occupied, and you have commerce, and you have interest. And perhaps you need more off-street parking or decks or other things. But this, I think, is a modest incremental change to the zoning that legitimizes some building or some land uses that people have wanted to try. And I think this council and this city has been good about doing that, kind of adapting. A lot of cities trying this right now, trying to pump life back into downtown and trying different things.
Thank you.
And I think this is what the C1 district should be doing, is encouraging more people to come down here and use our downtown core. I will say one thing, though, if I vote to approve this, it puts the pressure on me, and I think all of you, to put more work into figuring out a long-term parking solution. I know it's been bedeviling us for a long, long time, but we need to find something, whether it's going to a church and working out a deal to lease it from them. I mean, it may cost us money, but we need to do something for sure. But anyway.
Well, at least we know we have a problem. We can work on it.
We have a good problem.
Mr. Mayor, Eric, that's being worked on as we're talking today. I mean, it's.
Well, let's get this motion on the table. All in favor, show of hands. Opposers? None, the vote unanimous. Thank you so much, council members. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bryce.
Do you need to include note 24 in your motion?
Note 24?
Yes, just clarifying, I'm going to go right at it.
I think it's Swiss cheese. I think you drive a truck through it, so I don't. I think they left it in there. I think it means anything.
Okay, fiscal year 2022 budget adoption. We've talked about our budget. We've had budget hearings. And tonight, we're here to adopt the budget for July 1st. If we can get a motion in a second to adopt this budget.
Make it. So moved.
Second.
That more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none, vote unanimous. Thank you so much.
Hold on.
Could you hold it a second? I had a power failure.
Come on back, come on back.
Did you have comments?
We would need to go back on respeak the motion for the budget.
You need what now?
Just restate the
Okay.
motion, because I think we were off.
Carrie, you just,
I just said so moved for the budget of 2020.
Are we back on?
that we approve the budget as presented, correct?
Yes,
And I seconded it.
you did.
Are we on? Okay, Carrie, you will state the motion.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Reed, right?
I made a motion that we approve fiscal year 2022 budget adoption.
I second it.
That more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none, vote unanimous. Thank you so much. Karen, I believe this is you, recovery fund for non-entitlement insurance.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I gotta stand up.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been here for a while.
I'm afraid I won't be getting up if I don't.
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, the terms and conditions are, we're still working on those. The state was a little slow on getting the emails out, and so we will bring it back to you at a later date.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That was the recovery fund you?
Yes, sir.
2021-22 Georgia and accepting Main Street Memorandum of Understanding. I believe this is Karen. I think we just need to sign this document. Is that right, Karen? We do this every year for Main Street. No, you won't.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is just a document that is renewed every year once we complete our compliance for Georgia Exceptional Main Street Communities.
Okay, we can get a motion to approve this.
So moved.
Memorandum of Understanding. Second.
I'll second, Mr. Mayor.
That any more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Those are none, vote unanimously. Thank you. Madam Clerk, beer and wine amenity permit.
Yes, sir. This is an application for Zen Relaxing Wellness for an amenity permit. They are located at 271 West Washington Street. As you know from our amendment before, this only allows for them to give away. No sales are involved in this. And so I would like to present their application for approval. And the applicant named Angela Fetch for Zen Relaxing Wellness at 271 West Washington Street, Suite 140, for approval.
Where's 271 West Washington
Ice
Street?
House.
Ice, underneath Ice House?
Under the Ice House.
Downstairs, I
yes.
think.
Okay.
Can we get a motion to approve this beer and wine?
Yes,
So
Mayor, I move to approve the wine and beer amenity permit for Zen Relaxing Wellness for Ms. Fetch.
Second.
That more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none, vote unanimously. Thank you. Unfinished business, cost of living increase. City manager, none, this is something we do every year.
Yes, sir. And I apologize for having the wrong table. It made a little difference. It's about a 0.1%. But the South Urban All Consumers CPI 12-month over 12-month previous showed an increase of 1.08%. I've asked the council to allow us to adjust the scale accordingly.
Anybody have a problem with allowing our city manager to adjust the scale according to this 1%? Cost of living increase. If not, we can get a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve the cost of living increase of 1.08%.
Second.
That about discussion.
Mr. Mayor, just one question. Wasn't it 1.18?
1.18 was based on all urban, but
Okay.
this one is the south, so we may not be quite as inflationary as Boston or New York or Los Angeles. So it made a little difference. And I did have some employees and supervisors paying attention, and they ask about cost of living because it's all. Right now, you're talking about food and clothing and rent, and everything's flying up. But again, this is a more of a 12-month over 12 months. So this, if there are any inflationary pressures that hold up over time, then they'll be reflected in next year's and not necessarily this year's. So it dropped down a little bit, like I said, 1/10 of 1%. So it's 1.08%.
That was just, I just wanted to make sure.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none, vote unanimously. Thank you. Public service appointments, Public Art Commission, that you can. Yes, it is.
All right. I don't know, do you want to take these one board at a time?
Yes, sir.
Work for you? Okay. So the first we have is the Cemetery Stewardship Commission. So there are 5 appointments available. There should have been some last year and they got overlooked. So the way we're handling that is appointing 3 full terms and 2 unexpired terms, and that will return it back to a staggered appointment schedule. All of the current board members whose terms are up have reapplied, and no one else has applied. So you have Joseph Bell, also who goes by Clint, Elizabeth Fears, Patsy Harris, Denise Rice, and Lynn Treadwell, all seeking reappointment, and that is the same number that you have available tonight. So the only thing you really need to do is decide who gets a two-year term and who gets a 3-year term.
How are we determine who's getting the unexpired terms and the full terms?
They don't care.
They don't care.
And I'm gonna go ahead and proceed with where we're at, but I believe this is like the second time now where I believe we were gonna be talking about this at a work session, hash it out, put it on the consent agenda, and that, I mean, I'm not gonna live or die whether it happens that way or not, but I thought we kind of agreed on that, and then kind of passed it over last time, and now we're kind of back to where we were. But it looks like there's not a whole lot of competition for these, so I'm perfectly ready to go ahead with these now, but I think going forward, we should probably think about whether we're gonna do that or not. I mean, we talked about it, I thought that's what we were doing, and now we're...
Councilmember Joyce, if I may, Mr.
evidently
Mayor.
not.
Yes.
Ken has actually kind of formulated a format for us to follow going forward that I looked at today. I was going to write something up more formal for you all, so perhaps at a next work session I'll have that written up, and so you can at least know this is how we'll start voting in future meetings. So just so that'll be clear and everybody can kind of get their own vote if it's something you're interested in. I just didn't get that ready for you all today.
That sounds good, thank you. As far as the Cemetery Steward Commission goes, I've sat in a number of those meetings. They're really a very competent commission. I'm wondering if anybody, I believe Chris is the official liaison, but in her absence, do we have any recommendations for anyone as to who should get the unexpired? I mean, you said they don't care.
Can they work it out? Can this group work it out, who gets the unexpired term? Can, or,
It'd be better if y'all did.
I mean,
Well, do we know, based on these folks, who should have been reapplied last year? It'd be simple to do it and just plug it into the two.
Why don't you do it on length of service?
That's what I was saying.
I'd like to see, I might recommend that Lynn Treadwell, Patsy Harris, and Denise Rice get the long-term seats because they are the current officer set. And then Joseph Bell and Elizabeth Fears, and Ms. Fears has made noise about rolling off at some point. So you might want to give Joseph Bell and Elizabeth Fears the shorter 2 terms. That's a good.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I've got a motion if you would like to entertain one.
ready for it.
I move that we appoint Patsy Harris, Denise Rice, Lynn Treadwell to the 3-year terms of the Cemetery Steward Commission, and Joseph Bell and Elizabeth Fears to the 2 unexpired terms.
Second.
There more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, if not, vote unanimously. Thanks, Councilman Joyce. Okay, Green Space Conservation Commission.
Yes, sir, and I staffed this group. The previous group is staffed by Bryce, and he had already gone for the night. Sorry about that. So I staffed Green Space. We have several applicants this time. Lindsey Bryant, Rick Crown, Chris Lambert, David Land, Benjamin Prue. I'm going to get that. Nobody has an easy name this time. Letitia Simbach and Philip Schmeltzer. What I would say is you have 3 long-term people for continuity that would like to serve again. That would be Crown, Lambert, and Land. And then you have 1 expired term, and you have 1 empty seat as of today. That would make 2 unexpired terms. That would be Sally Toole has moved outside of the city and turned in her resignation. And Philip Barnes, I spoke with him today, and he is interested in moving over to our housing team, which I'm very excited about that, to have a young man on our housing team. So
Who is that, you said?
Philip Barnes is currently on there, and so he and Sally Toole's seats are now unexpired terms.
So we need to appoint 2 of these 4. Have I got the gist of that?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I personally do find it a little, I love dumbing things down. Can we just get a number of how many slots?
You got 2 slots, you got 4 applicants.
Yeah, because I don't see that here, and I got to go through all kinds of mental stuff to figure out.
You got 2
how many
slots,
we're
you got
appointing.
4 applicants, and
We
you
can
got,
take a break for you, Eric.
and you got,
Steaming, but the skiers are running out of oil or something.
and you have 2 recommendations. The recommendations from the executive committee were, this is the officers of the group, they really liked the background of Mr. Prue and Philip Schmeltzer. If you've read through their applications, they are strong applications. And I talked to David Land today. He'd like to recommend those 2 people to fill the 2 seats. And then he would also like to take Miss Letitia and Miss Lindsey Bryant into one of their ad hoc committees so that they can serve and get active, but he's not asking for their board seats. Again, that's a recommendation out of the body, and that is not a requirement.
I think it's helpful. Thank you.
And as far as Mr. Prue goes, I've been trying to get him on HPC for a couple of years, so I think he's got a great resume.
His resume is amazing. I've actually spoke with him a couple of times.
Okay, can we get a motion?
Go ahead, Eric.
No, I did the cemetery. The cemetery, they don't complain, they're very quiet.
Okay, let's go.
I'll give it a try, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
And if I speak out of turn, let me know, but we're appointing 5 people. So I move that we reappoint Rick Crown, Chris Lambert, David Land, and then appoint Benjamin Prue and Philip Smeltzer to the Green Space Commission.
Second.
That more discussion?
And just for clarification, Mr. Prue, Mr. Schmeltzer would fill the unexpired terms.
Right.
And Miss Letitia would go to where?
Miss Letitia and Miss Lindsay would be asked to serve on the ad hoc committees, so some of their work groups.
Okay.
Is there more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none. Vote no. So much.
Thank you, everyone.
Public Arts Commission.
All right, this one is mine. I think it's an easy one. There are 3 open seats, all
Thank you,
full-
Ken.
all full terms, and there are only 2 applications.
Okay, could you repeat that one more time?
So, and if, in the coming month or so, if you can think of someone else who would be great on this commission, we're certainly looking for that third one. But you have 2 applications for 3 openings.
And if you recognize the Archambault name, that's that interior design place on West Washington. So she's a merchant here in town, or a retailer, I guess you'd call her.
Yep.
Sherry Hawkins is also, she's not
That's
a
right. She's my,
mind, body, and spirit wellness.
Thank you.
Okay. Get a motion to approve those 2?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any more discussion? All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, is none. The vote is unanimous. Thank you so much.
Can I get a clarification on who? made the
Everybody
motion?
said so moved, but you can pick one of us. No.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. Are there any public comments, Monica? Sure.
It's not on. Mike's not on.
Okay, thank you, boss. So just one public announcement. I'm getting 3 to 4 phone calls a day now. So I told you this at your work session, but I'm hoping that we have members of the public that are watching, and I know the press is covering it today. So I want to make sure that I announce Canaan Crossing, which is the 60 units of affordable housing that's being built at the corner of March and Wheat. City Hall or myself are getting 3 to 4 phone calls a day now. And I know that I've heard at least one of our elected officials is getting phone calls. That is a private development. WODA will be taking the leasing applications. They will not be taking those to around August or early September. There will be a leasing sign posted on the site. And then they will officially fill up the facility in February is their date of service. But they may start placing people in finished buildings as early as November. Again, if any member of the public wants additional information on renting Canaan Crossing, because rents are going up everywhere, so there's lots of questions, please hold those phone calls to late August, early September, and check the site for a leasing agency sign. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Okay, let's take a quick break. Public comments, first of all.
You called for public comments about a minute and a half ago, and we've heard none. Based on the delay on Boxcast, you may be safe to go into your break.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and go to executive session.
Hello.
Yep.
You do.
Hello?
Hi, this is Carol Winslow. I just wanted to say that the sound improved at 6:37 p.m. I don't know if you have an input that suddenly got turned on, but I know that it's hard to listen to us complain about not being able to hear, but it's very hard to not pick up the, one word out of 10 seconds worth of dialogue. So I apologize for, sounding a little upset about it, but it is frustrating. But whatever got fixed at 6:37 made the sound work much better. And I was able to hear nothing before that, though. It's just, random words that would pop up. A thing that would be helpful, I believe, would be if you had one camera on the actual presenter. I think that would be very helpful. Some people read lips a little bit, and it would kind of supplement the sound quality. And also, I can hear now if you're speaking into the microphone. If you're leaning back, I really can't make it out. But thank you for your patience with us, and appreciate y'all being there.
Thank you so much. Our public comments to close. Take a quick break if you need to.
Do you, Mr. Mayor, do you want to make a motion to go into executive session, or do that when you come back from the break?
Come back.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I hate it, get them to sign it, just get it ready for them.
What's that? Didn't I stay with that, Joey?
No. When they talk about.
Executive session.
It looks like a city manager have a hard.
I know, but it's not- just checking. All right, I'll see you.
I talked to them about it this morning, I just thought it, when our attorney says that, put it to bed, instead of us saying, well, she's an attorney, she's arguing on a legal basis. Good job.
She can lay out what she wants.
No, good point. She can do it in person.
I'm gonna ask him, can you get how much is this paid?
What it is with our.
I tell people, if you're frustrated, and I got frustrated at the point I was paid I tried to get on, so I didn't have what I had behind me. And I couldn't do it either. Go to a meeting, they're going to one. So I get, but I also get stuff.
$15 an hour.
So if you know of somebody who's interested, send them my way, but I am looking for, it could be a young person that's just got a strong, it could be a young person that's got a strong enough personality, or it can be an older person who is steady and has clerical experience, but really needs somebody that has to deal with devious contractors or issue developers or whiny homeowners.
There's a lot of adjectives in that, Monica.
Well,
Devious.
it's a frontline person.
It's definitely, yeah.
You know how important it is, like when you've got.
But you get, I think it's a fun position too, because you get to know things
Yeah,
ahead of everybody else.
that's true.
Monica, I appreciate you coming.
I'm sorry, I know that I sound rough, but I know like the total bullshit.
When you get back in the corner, you can.
Don't pull any punches,
No, I'm just,
Monica, I do want to do this.
I wanna stop the misrepresentation.
The newly bought, and I love Patrick, he's a friend of mine, but the paper does send us excellent proof of publication or whatever, public notice. Can we take that and scan it in and put it in the record so it's in the packet?
We're typically scanning it and putting it in the, we typically put the tear sheet in the zoning folder. There's no reason not to scan it. And then that way everybody can see what we can, but it's never enough. It's never enough.
I know that, but I'll never forget the time that, hey, Monica, Gloves was being built, remember when, I hardly remember who it was, maybe Catherine Andrews, that said, how did this happen? We shouldn't be all up in arms about a truck stop, and you didn't give public notice. And we knew she was going to ask, so the mayor had it right in front of us, ran in the paper, public hearing, so we were ahead of that. You can guess she's going to do it every time.
Back on my position.
We've heard it, standard.
You gonna hang out? You gonna come back in and open the meeting back up?
That's the way it is right now. Everything's muted. Right now it says break, and then switch over. You said it's not going to take long, right?
It's not. I hope 10 minutes, but it's hard to know.
Everybody's on camera.
Ken,
Sir.
January 1st, Bruce will be going. Doesn't she?
Yes, sir.
So much work.
Yeah.
If you want to wait till January, you can wait. I have found that DDA is still like been here a lifetime.
That's true. Clifford is retired at Energy Park, is that right? Is he going to fill
You know, I'm trying to figure out if there was something that was,
Okay.
Get somebody to do something. All they have to do is, they don't have to do what's perfect.
yeah.
Yeah, you will. And Jordan, that's Jordan's something like.
No, I mean, later on there was a problem, but I don't think it was at that.
I think it was just the rain.
I think it was the rain.
Because we went out with my home and really well, but we have really good Wi-Fi.
DOT sent me this list where we
They
had
come.
to take the guys who got some rewards.
So when I listen to these, because I listen to all these for, when I'm doing this, because I can't see all the credits.
Do you need part-time help?
Correct, we're gonna need a full-time.
And I can hear all of them, and I actually had to tell Ken because y'all, and
Really?
all of the sound is like,
Anyway, I don't know, I'm looking to hire
It's
to
too
add.
loud. So we have to turn that, but then.
And something a lot of people don't realize is how much time and money can
I know.
these commissions after
But
hours.
when I had to be home, it was.
HPC, 7:38 like at night.
We're still here.
Yeah.
So I try not to eat because my fingers are.
Better get this meeting over with.
Okay, let's stop.
Time.
With the comments, all I see.
9 to 5.
How did Dave step out?
Let's say it go.
Mr. Mayor, I missed a step coming down from the second floor. I took it too bad at all.
And I just knocked out about 4 of these little minis. I noticed you threw a few wrappers away too, but I didn't any evidence. Just a little.
Just a little, not much. I go on vacation this week, so I'm okay.
Did one of my constituents, Sally Fowler, contact you about the community garden?
We're gonna, did a vote to go into executive session.
Mr. Mayor, I move we go into executive session to discuss salaries and personnel.
Okay.
A second.
All in favor, show of hands. Opposed, none, we're now in executive session.
All right, if you give me 1 second.
So what did you think?
I think it's a good idea, but I've been back in the area of the countries, and talk to those constituents and people that she not.
The Rose of Sharon Church?
I gave them contact
They
information.
think it's abandoned or something, is that the case?
COVID-19 now. But there's the.
They want to use that.
Okay.
No. Just talk to the people.
That's the best.
David,
Ma'am,
you'll write down the motion for me.
exit.
Y'all have a good night.
Good night, Ashley.
Thank you.
Oh, and if anybody wants to know, the agenda was posted on 6/7/2021 at 5:03:53 seconds.
You didn't take that personally, did you?
Right, y'all.
Bye, Ashley.
Well, there was a little stab in that
It was.
thing about whether this was, and the fact that if we'd done anything, if the staff had done anything wrong, would be one thing, but she said, is it deliberate, was it deliberate or an accident that we didn't get notice? She says that every time.
And that's why I brought up what I said, because that was in the city website almost a month ago, that exact same planning department report.
All right, very quickly, this is a review. You have in front of you every employee. I think the list might have changed by one. Melissa Pache over the weekend tendered her resignation. You know, she was a permit tech at the planning department. She did a fantastic job. She lost her mother recently and has her stepfather has health conditions and whatnot, and she's been dealing with that. So we're going to be advertising, looking for someone in that position. Otherwise, I think we may be one police officer short, and I think the gas department hired up some to start that project and be a little more aggressive on construction. And staffing comment. I looked at our retirement portfolio, our actuary report, and we're quite a young. A few years ago, we had little turnover. Now we've got a lot. We've had a lot of people leave, retire, attrition of different types, and we got quite a few people less than 10 years with the city. Quite a few. But anyway, getting back to salaries, you can see these numbers. I've highlighted anything